going in this video, we're going to talk about how to graph polynomial functions. So it's a two-step process. Let's check out step one. Step one says to plot points to determine the shape of the graph's middle portion. So these are going to be x values that we plug in into our polynomial function or our polynomial equation, and we solve for the y value, and that's going to give us a coordinate. We can plot those points, and then we can draw our curve through those points. And let's take a look at step two. So connect those points with a smooth continuous curve and use what you know about end behavior to sketch the graph. So we did a separate video, I'll link that in the cards right now, on end behavior of polynomial functions. And we talked about kind of four different types, right? If our leading coefficient is positive or negative, and if the degree is even or odd. And so there's kind of four different ways that the graph could behave, the end of it, right? So in this video, we're gonna look at two examples where we graph the polynomial functions. So our first one says f of x equals x cubed plus x squared minus 4x plus 2. So if we think about the previous video on end behavior, we know, hey, this is an odd degree, so it's going to look either something like this or something like that, right? So it depends on, is our leading coefficient positive or negative? Well, in this case, our leading coefficient is 1. That's a positive 1, so our graph should look something like that, right? And so now we can go ahead and we look at these 5 points we have at the bottom, -2 to +2. So -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So I'm just going to take those x values and plug them into my calculator in for all of these x's right here. So right here, here, and here. So the first one I'm going to do is -2. So I'm going to do -2 cubed plus -2 squared minus 4 times -2 and then plus 2. And that gives me 6. Okay, so I know I have a point at -2, 6, right? So now I'm going to do the same thing with -1. So we do -1 cubed plus -1 squared minus 4 times -1 plus 2, and we get 6 again. So we put a 6 right there, and we have a point at -1, 6. Okay, so now we're going to plug in 0. Now this one we could probably do in our heads, because once we plug in 0 for x, all of those are going to go away, and we're left with just this plus 2 at the end, so 0, 2. So we put our point there. All right, so now let's plug in 1. So we're going to have 1 cubed plus 1 squared, so this is going to be 1 right here. And then minus 4 times 1, so 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 minus 4 is -2, -2 plus 2 would be 0. So we have a point at 1, 0. And now let's do 2. So we have 2 cubed plus 2 squared minus 4 times 2 plus 2, right? And we get 6 one more time. So we have 2, 6, okay? So we've plotted those points. Now we can connect our points, right? We know this curve that we're supposed to have, right? So that's us connecting the points. And now let's use our end behavior, our knowledge of end behavior, to continue this graph on like that and also down like that, right? So that is what the graph of our first function would look like, okay? All right, so for our next one, we have f of x equals -x to the 4th minus x cubed plus 2x squared minus x minus 3, okay? So a couple things we notice, our leading coefficient is negative and our degree is odd, right? Or excuse me, our degree is even. So that's going to tell me our graph is going to look something like that, right? Kind of like an M, okay? So for this one, we're going to plug in x values of -2 to 1, because once we plug in an x value of 2, we're going to get like -130. So that's not going to fit on our graph, right? So let's go ahead and start plugging in. So we're going to plug in -2 first. So we're going to say, we're going to type in negative and then in parentheses -2 to the 4th power. And then minus, in parentheses, -2 to the 3rd power, plus 2 times -2 squared minus -2, and then minus 3. Okay, and that gives us a -1. So that means we have a point at -2, -1, so we can put that right there. And now let's plug in -1. So -1 to the 4th minus -1 to the 3rd power, plus 2 times -1 squared, and then minus -1 minus 3. All right, and we get 0, so -1, 0. Now we plug in 0, once again, all of our x's are going to go away, and we're just going to be left with our constant at the end, so that's a -3, so we can put that in there. All right, so we have negative and then 1 to the 4th power. I accidentally hit multiplication instead of subtraction, so be careful with that. Plus 2 times 1 squared minus 1 minus 3. There we go. -4 is what we should have, okay? So 1 and -4, good. All right, so now we have these 4 points. We know it's supposed to look like some kind of M, right? So once we connect these, let's go up a little bit and then down here, okay? And then we're gonna come up with this one and then down a little bit right there, okay? So our end behavior, we know we're going down, right? As x approaches positive and negative infinity, right? As we go to the left and to the right, y or f of x is approaching negative infinity, right? So that's what our graph is going to look like. And so we can use just really 2 steps here, right? We plug in some x values to get the shape of our middle portion of our graph. And then we use what we know about the end behavior of polynomial functions to help us sketch the rest of the graph. So that's how you can graph polynomial functions.